Forget marble statues. The ancient world was a grim spectacle, run by divine hunters who demanded human sacrifice and destroyed lives on a whim. We're peeling back the layers of their madness. This is Shroud of Lore.
While the goddesses of Olympus bartered their honor for a golden fruit, King Priam, terrified by fate, condemned his own infant to be devoured by beasts, hoping to purchase peace with the price of innocent blood. The dream came to Hecuba first. She woke screaming in the deepest hour of night, her hands clawing at her swollen belly as if trying to tear something out. When the servants finally calmed her enough to speak, her words turned Priam's blood to ice. "I dreamed I gave birth to a torch," she whispered, her eyes wild and unfocused. "A burning brand that set fire to everything it touched. The walls of Troy melted like wax. The towers collapsed. And the flames were shaped like our sun." Priam summoned the priests at dawn. He summoned the seers, the oracle readers, the interpreters of omens. One by one, they examined the queen, consulted their sacred texts, and delivered the same verdict in different words. The child in Hecuba's womb would be the destruction of Troy. Not might be. Would be. The gods had already written the ending. "Kill it," said Aesacus, the king's own son from a previous marriage, who had inherited the gift of prophecy from his mother. "The moment it draws breath, dash its head against the stones. It is the only way." Priam sent everyone away. He sat alone in his chamber as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the mosaic floor. He was king of Troy, master of the greatest city in the world, commander of armies, keeper of sacred trusts. He had 50 sons and 50 daughters. He had wealth beyond counting, walls that had never been breached, the favor of gods and men alike. And now he was being asked to murder his own child. The rational part of his mind understood the calculus. One life against thousands. One infant against an entire civilization. The priests were clear: if the child lived, Troy would burn. The equation was simple. The answer was obvious. But when he closed his eyes, he saw the face of his son Hector, 6 years old, laughing as he chased butterflies in the palace garden. He saw Paris's older brothers, strong, noble, already showing the makings of heroes. He imagined this new child, this condemned soul, growing up among them. Learning to walk. Learning to speak. Learning to love his father. Then he imagined wrapping his hands around that small throat and squeezing. Priam's stomach heaved. He barely made it to the basin before the sickness took him. He could not do it. He could not look into the eyes of his own son and end his life. Even if the prophecy was true, and prophecies were always true, that was the cruel joke of them, he could not be the one to swing the sword. But he could not simply ignore the warning either. Troy's fate hung in the balance. His people, his legacy, his immortal name, all would be ash if he allowed this child to live and grow and fulfill its destiny. There had to be another way. A middle path. Something that would satisfy the demands of fate without requiring him to become a monster. The solution came to him like poison, sweet and deadly. He would not kill the child himself. He would simply remove him. Place him somewhere far from Troy, far from the throne, far from any chance to fulfill the prophecy. The wilderness of Mount Ida, perhaps. The wolves and bears would do what Priam's hands could not. Or perhaps some shepherd would find the babe and raise him as a common peasant, never knowing his true blood. Either way, the prince would be gone. The threat would be neutralized. And Priam could tell himself, in the dark watches of the night, that he had given his son a chance. It was cowardice dressed as mercy. He knew this even as he made the decision. But it was the only choice he could live with. When Hecuba gave birth 3 days later, Priam did not go to see the child. He sent his most trusted servant, Agelos, with simple instructions: take the infant to Mount Ida, leave him in the wilderness, and return with proof that the deed was done. Agelos returned the next morning with a small cloth stained with blood. "It is finished, my king," he said. The child cried for a time, but eventually fell silent. "The beasts will have found him by now." Priam took the cloth and burned it in the sacred fire. He told himself he had saved Troy. He told himself the prophecy was defeated. He told himself many things in the years that followed. But the one thing he could never tell himself, no matter how hard he tried, was that he was innocent. The years passed like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold, impossible to stop. Priam ruled Troy with steady hands and a heart that never quite healed. He watched his other sons grow into men. Hector became the greatest warrior the city had ever known, a pillar of strength and honor that made Priam's chest swell with pride. His other children flourished, princes and princesses, each one a jewel in the crown of his dynasty. And yet, there were nights when Priam woke in cold sweat, certain he had heard an infant crying somewhere in the darkness. There were moments when he caught himself counting his children and feeling, absurdly, that one was missing. There were times when the wind from the east carried a strange scent, pine and wildflowers and something else, something that made his heart clench with a grief he could not name. He never spoke of the abandoned child. Neither did Hecuba, though sometimes Priam caught her staring at nothing, her hand pressed against her stomach as if feeling a phantom kick. The subject was buried so deep that it might as well have never existed. Meanwhile, on Mount Olympus, the gods played their eternal games. Priam knew nothing of the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, where every deity was invited except one. He knew nothing of Eris, goddess of discord, hurling a golden apple into the celebration with the words, "For the fairest," inscribed upon its skin. He knew nothing of the three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, who each claimed the prize as their own, nor of Zeus's cowardly refusal to judge between them. What mortal could judge between goddesses? What mortal would dare? But the gods needed a judge. And in their infinite wisdom, they chose a young shepherd on the slopes of Mount Ida. A remarkably handsome young man who tended his flocks with unusual grace, who was said to be wise beyond his years, who had somehow survived alone in the wilderness since infancy. His name, the shepherd said, was Paris. Priam never heard this name. He never learned that his abandoned son had been found by a she-bear who nursed him as her own, then discovered by Agelos himself, who could not bring himself to let the child die and instead raised him in secret among the mountain herders. He never knew that the servant he trusted most had betrayed him out of compassion. So when the divine summons came to Paris, three radiant goddesses descending from the clouds, each offering impossible bribes for his favor, Priam was attending to matters of state in his great hall, utterly unaware that his past was about to catch fire. Hera offered Paris power, dominion over all Asia, kingship beyond anything his father possessed. Athena offered wisdom and skill in war, the ability to conquer any enemy, to never taste defeat. But Aphrodite, beautiful, cunning Aphrodite, offered something simpler. "Give me the apple," she whispered, "and I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta, whose face could launch 1,000 ships. She will be yours." Paris, who had never known he was a prince, who had no idea that his choice would doom his father's city, smiled and handed Aphrodite the golden fruit. The bargain was struck. The wheels of fate, which Priam thought he had stopped 20 years ago, began to turn with terrible speed. And still the king of Troy suspected nothing. He celebrated festivals and judged disputes and planned great games to honor the gods. He announced a grand competition, wrestling, racing, contests of strength and skill, open to all men of the realm. He even offered, as the grand prize, the finest bull from his own herds. It was this bull that would unravel everything. Because that bull had been taken from the slopes of Mount Ida, from the flocks of a certain shepherd who was rather attached to it. And that shepherd, determined to win back what was his, descended from the mountain to compete in the king's games. His name was Paris. And he was about to come home. The stadium roared with 10,000 voices as the final race began. Priam sat in the royal box, flanked by his sons, watching the competitors sprint across the packed earth. Hector had already won the wrestling. Deiphobus had taken the javelin throw. The house of Priam was dominating the games, as it should, and the king allowed himself a rare moment of contentment. Then a young man he had never seen before crossed the finish line 3 lengths ahead of the crown princes. The crowd fell silent. Priam leaned forward, squinting at the victor. The youth was dressed in rough shepherd's clothes, his feet bare, his hair wild and sun-bleached. But his face, there was something about his face that made Priam's heart stutter. Some echo of features he saw every day in the mirror. "Who is that?" he demanded. No one knew. The young man simply stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard, a small smile playing at his lips. When the heralds approached to ask his name, he answered in a voice that carried across the stadium. "I am Paris. I came to win back my bull." Deiphobus, humiliated by his defeat, stormed onto the field with his sword drawn. "A shepherd dares to defeat princes? I'll teach you your place, peasant." What happened next would be debated for generations. Some said Paris moved like water, flowing around Deiphobus' wild swings. Others said he fought like a man possessed, as if the gods themselves guided his hands. Within moments, Deiphobus was disarmed and on his knees, and Paris stood over him with the prince's own sword at his throat. "I came for a bull," Paris said calmly. "I have no quarrel with princes." The crowd erupted. Priam's guards rushed forward, uncertain whether to arrest the shepherd or applaud him. In the chaos, a single voice cut through the noise, high, clear, and filled with horror. "Brother! He is our brother!" Everyone turned. Cassandra, Priam's daughter, cursed by Apollo to speak true prophecies that no one believed, was pushing through the crowd toward the arena. Her eyes were wild, her face pale as death. "I know him," she screamed. "I see him. The torch. The burning torch. Father, he is your son. The one you sent to die." Priam's world tilted. He gripped the arm of his throne so hard his knuckles went white. It could not be. The child was dead. Agelos had brought proof. 20 years had passed. But Cassandra never lied. She could not lie, that was her curse. She could only speak truths that no one believed. Guards seized Paris and dragged him to the royal box. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. He had Priam's jawline, Hecuba's eyes, the unmistakable bearing of royal blood despite his peasant clothes. He looked at the king with a mixture of defiance and confusion. "I do not understand," Paris said. "I am no one's brother. I was raised by shepherds on Mount Ida." "Raised by shepherds," Priam repeated, his voice hollow. "After being left there to die. By my order." The words hung in the air like smoke. Paris's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The crowd murmured, uncertain what was happening, sensing only that something momentous had shifted. Priam summoned Agelos, who fell to his knees and confessed everything. He had found the infant alive, nursed by a wild bear, and could not bring himself to complete the murder. He had raised the boy as his own grandson, never telling him the truth of his birth. "Forgive me, my king," the old servant wept. "I could not kill a child. Not even for Troy." Priam barely heard him. He was staring at Paris, at this impossible ghost, at the living proof that fate could not be cheated. 20 years of believing he had saved his city. 20 years of guilt and nightmares and carefully constructed denial. All of it meaningless. The torch still burned. The prophecy still waited. And now, standing before him, was the face of Troy's destruction, and it was his own face, reflected back through the mirror of time. "Kill him," Hector said quietly, appearing at his father's side. "Kill him now, before it's too late. We can still stop the prophecy." Paris met Priam's gaze. There was no hatred there, no accusation. Only a profound sadness, and beneath it, something that might have been hope. "Is it true?" the young man asked. "Are you my father?" The silence stretched like a bowstring drawn to breaking. "Kill him," Hector said quietly, appearing at his father's side. "Kill him now. We can still stop the prophecy." Priam looked at his son, this ghost, this miracle, this walking doom, and felt 20 years of carefully constructed lies collapse into dust. He had told himself he was a savior. He had told himself duty demanded sacrifice. He had dressed murder in the robes of necessity and called himself wise. The gods had answered by preserving Paris anyway, raising him far from law and honor, letting Aphrodite whisper her poison promise into his ear. The damage was already done. The golden apple had been judged. Helen was already waiting across the sea. Killing Paris now would change nothing. It would only add one more murder to Priam's soul. "Father?" Paris' voice cracked. "Please. I have dreamed of knowing you my whole life." Priam stepped forward. His guards tensed. Hector's hand moved toward his sword. But the king did not reach for a weapon. The embrace was awkward, royalty clutching rags, neither knowing how to hold the other. Then Paris' body shook with sobs, and something frozen for 20 years finally cracked open in Priam's chest. "I will not make that choice again," he whispered. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He turned to the stunned crowd. "This man is Paris, son of Priam, prince of Troy. Let all who hear know that the house of Priam claims him as blood and heir." The cheers were uncertain, confused. Cassandra wept unnoticed. Hector bowed his head in grim acceptance. Priam took his son's hand and led him toward the palace. Behind them, the future gathered like storm clouds, ships and spears and a woman whose face would launch 1,000 deaths. Troy would burn. The walls would crumble. Everything Priam loved would turn to ash. But he would not burn as a coward. Not this time. As they climbed the steps, Paris looked up at the towers with wonder. "It's beautiful," he breathed. "Yes," said Priam, watching his son's face rather than the city. "Yes, it is." The torch had come home. And Priam, who had tried so hard to snuff it out, finally chose to let it burn.